The summer of 1889 was hot in the Blue Ridge foothills, and a man named Elias Cord was 600 feet underground when his lantern stopped being enough. Cord was 34 years old, a contract miner working a copper seam in an unnamed passage branching west off the main shaft of the Crabtree Creek operation in Mitchell County, North Carolina. His occupation is listed in the Mitchell County tax rolls for 1888 and 1889 as mine laborer, copper extraction. He was not a geologist. He was not a surveyor. He was a man paid to move rock, and on the morning of July the 14th, 1889, the rock he moved opened into something that his diary, preserved for over a century inside a cedar chest in his granddaughter's home in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, describes in language that takes several readings to absorb fully. He wrote, "The wall gave way, and the air inside was warm, and the light was not from my lamp." That sentence is the beginning of a record his family sealed for 83 years. No explanation has ever been formally offered for what it describes. What the diary records across the following 11 entries that stop without conclusion on the 26th of July, 1889, is a chamber of undetermined dimensions, reached through a natural fissure in the Crabtree Creek copper workings, that produced its own illumination from a source Cord could not identify and made no attempt to name. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The journal itself is a small ledger, approximately 7 inches by 4 inches, bound in brown calfskin that has darkened with age to the color of old tobacco. Cord's granddaughter, a woman named Ruth Hensley, née Cord, gave a single interview to a regional historian named Paul Graybeal in 1972, when the journal was first shown to anyone outside the family. Graybeal was compiling a history of mining operations in Yancey and Mitchell counties for the Tow River Valley Historical Society. He was not looking for anomalies. He was looking for wage records and operational logs. Ruth Hensley contacted him after reading a notice he placed in the Spruce Pine newspaper asking for personal documents related to the copper mining era. She showed him the journal. She did not let him photograph it. She read selected passages aloud while he transcribed. His transcription, typed on 3 pages of onion skin paper and filed with the Tow River Valley Historical Society in Burnsville, North Carolina, is the only external record of the journal's contents that exists from the 1970s. Graybeal described the journal in his filing as unusual personal testimony from a period laborer, possibly of historical interest, though the more peculiar entries defy simple categorization. He filed it under Miscellaneous Personal Documents, Mitchell County, and moved on to other research. The subject does not appear in any of his subsequent publications. The cedar chest in Spruce Pine. Ruth Hensley died in 1989, exactly 100 years after her grandfather entered the passage. The cedar chest passed to her daughter, who was not interested in its contents, and moved it to a storage unit in Marion, North Carolina, where it remained for 14 years. In 2003, a community archivist named Sandra Vance, working under a state grant to digitize pre-1950 personal documents in western North Carolina's mountain counties, contacted the family through a probate record. The daughter agreed to let Vance photograph the contents of the chest. The journal was among them. Vance's digitization scan of the journal runs to 41 images, each page photographed individually under even artificial light. The scans are on file with the Western Carolina University Special Collections in Cullowhee, North Carolina, catalogued under the accession number MS2003114. They are available to researchers on request. The handwriting is consistent throughout the document, a careful, slightly cramped cursive that is legible without difficulty. The entries before July the 14th describe routine mining work, the depth of the current drive, the quality of the copper seam, complaints about the condition of the hoist rope, a note about a co-worker named Augustus Bell who had injured his hand. The tone is flat and practical. Cord was recording work, not composing prose. The July the 14th entry is different in character, not in handwriting. The hand is the same, different in what it tries to do. The entry is the longest in the journal, running to just over 300 words. It describes the discovery of the fissure, which Cord says he noticed when a section of the western wall of the lateral passage crumbled under his pick to reveal cool air moving from behind it. He widened the opening over the course of roughly 2 hours, working alone, and then pushed through into a space he describes as considerably larger than any mined chamber he had entered before. He writes that the ceiling was beyond the reach of his lamp's light. He writes that the floor was level and smooth in a way that he compares to river stone worn flat by water, though he notes the surface was dry. He writes that the air was warmer than it should have been at that depth, and warmer than the passage he had come through. And then he writes the sentence that Ruth Hensley read aloud to Paul Graybeale, and that Graybeale transcribed verbatim. "The light in this place was not from my lamp, it came from the stone itself, a blue-green colour, faint but steady, as if the rock was lit from within the way a coal holds heat." The remaining entries from July the 15th through July the 26th describe return visits to the chamber, each one brief. Cord does not appear to have told his supervisors or co-workers about the opening. He mentions Augustus Bell only once more after the 14th, to note that Bell was back at work. He does not mention sharing the discovery with anyone. The entries describe him measuring the chamber by pacing. He records a length of at least 60 paces and a width he could not determine because the far wall was beyond his visibility. He records that the light was brighter on subsequent visits than on the first, though he offers no explanation for the change. He records that the floor had markings on it. He uses the word lines, that he describes as straight and running in parallel across a portion of the floor nearest the fissure entrance. The entry for July the 25th contains one sentence that Graybeale transcribed and underlined in his onion skin notes. The lines are not natural. The entry for July the 26th is the last one in the journal. It is also the shortest, 4 lines. Cord records that he had returned to the fissure and found the opening partially collapsed. He records that he could hear something moving on the far side of the debris, but could not determine what it was. He records that he left the passage and did not return. After that, the journal is blank. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more stories like this one. What the Crabtree Creek operations records show for the summer of 1889 is a gap of its own. The Mitchell County Mining Registry, held at the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh under record group DMM 1887-1902, contains operational logs for 12 copper mining operations in the county during that period. The Crabtree Creek entries are filed under the operator name Roan Mountain Copper Company, a Knoxville-based firm that held the lease from 1885 through 1893. The log for the Crabtree Creek workings is maintained without interruption for the entirety of the lease period, with one exception. The entries for July the 17th through July the 22nd, 1889 are missing. Not blank, missing. The relevant pages have been removed from the bound log. The binding shows evidence of excision. A faint line of torn paper fiber is visible along the inner margin where pages were pulled. The entry for July the 16th ends mid-sentence. The entry for July the 23rd begins without any reference to the gap. The North Carolina State Archives cataloging notes for this record acknowledge the missing pages. They list the cause as damage probable. No further explanation is offered. Elias Cord's name appears in the Crabtree Creek payroll records for the weeks ending July the 6th and July the 13th, 1889. He does not appear in the payroll record for the week ending July the 20th. He reappears in the record for the week ending August the 3rd, listed under a different lateral designation than his previous entries, meaning he had been reassigned to a different section of the mine. No personnel note explains the reassignment. No record of a disciplinary action, injury, or voluntary transfer accompanies the change. He left the Crabtree Creek operation entirely by September of 1889. The payroll records simply stop. He does not appear in Mitchell County records again after the 1890 census, in which he is listed as a resident of the county, occupation given as laborer. After that year, his name disappears from the Mitchell County record entirely. The Blue Ridge physiographic province is underlain by some of the oldest exposed rock in North America. The basement metamorphic and igneous formations of the southern Appalachians date to the Precambrian, in some cases exceeding 1 billion years in age. These are rocks that were once deep in the Earth's crust, subjected to pressures and temperatures that deform and recrystallize mineral structures over timescales that make the entire span of human existence look negligible. Certain minerals native to these formations are luminescent under specific conditions. Fluorite, present in the mineralized veins of the Blue Ridge copper belt, exhibits fluorescence and in some formations produces a faint glow at ambient temperatures due to trace rare earth elements incorporated during crystallization. Willemite, a zinc silicate, produces a bright green luminescence. Calcite specimens from certain localities in the Appalachian metamorphic belt exhibit thermoluminescence at elevated temperatures. A chamber at 600 feet in the Blue Ridge foothills, located in the transition zone between the copper-bearing green schist of the Roan Mountain sequence and the deeper Precambrian gneisses, would sit precisely in the geological range where multiple luminescent mineral species could coexist. Warm air rising from greater depth through natural convection could produce elevated temperatures relative to the surrounding rock. The combination is not impossible. None of this explains the parallel lines that Cord describes on the chamber floor. The word lines appears 3 times in the journal, across 4 entries. On July the 16th, he writes that they are straight as a ruled edge. On July the 19th, he writes that they are cut into the stone, not painted or scratched, but cut, like a channel made by a tool. On July the 25th, he writes the sentence "Graybiel" underlined. The lines are not natural. He does not record their number, their spacing, or their length. He does not record whether they follow any pattern beyond parallelism. What the diary shows is a man returning to a space 4 times across 11 days, and on each return paying increasing attention to something on the floor that his first entry does not mention at all, which suggests he either did not notice the lines on July the 14th, or noticed them and did not yet have language for what he was seeing. The Mitchell County copper belt was worked sporadically from the 18th century forward, with the most intensive extraction occurring between 1860 and 1910. The geology of the region was documented by the United States Geological Survey in a series of monographs. USGS Monograph 22, published in 1893 under the title Copper Deposits of the Southern Appalachians, covers the Crabtree Creek area and notes the presence of natural cavities in the lateral passages of several operations. The monograph was authored by a geologist named Charles Walcott, who later served as secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. Walcott's survey of the Crabtree Creek workings is recorded as having been conducted in October of 1891. He arrived 2 years after Cord's final journal entry and 2 years after the partial collapse Cord describes in his last entry. Walcott's monograph makes no mention of an unusually large natural chamber in the western lateral of the Crabtree Creek operation. His description of the operation's geology is brief and unremarkable. Either the chamber was fully collapsed by the time of his survey and presented nothing worth noting, or he accessed sections of the operation that did not include the western lateral, or the chamber was not accessible. The monograph does not say. What the USG's field notes for the 1891 Crabtree Creek survey show, the unpublished field notes, held at the USG's archives in Reston, Virginia, under accession number USGS FN 1891 NC-07, is a notation in Walcott's handwriting on the 3rd page of the Mitchell County section, Western Lateral, access obstructed, not entered. The notation is followed by a mark that his archivists have catalogued as illegible character, possibly an asterisk. Below it, in the margin, a second notation in the same hand reads, "Refer to company." The company would have been the Roan Mountain Copper Company, whose lease was still active in 1891. No referral document has been located in either the USGS archives or the North Carolina State Archives. The pattern that the Crabtree Creek case presents is not unique to Mitchell County. In 1895, a miner named Samuel Aldridge, working a barite operation in Carroll County, Virginia, reported in a letter to his brother, the letter survives in the Carroll County Historical Society collection, that he had found a passage behind a fallen ceiling section that gave off a pale light like foxfire, but from the rock walls, not from any growth. He described the passage as narrow but of considerable length and noted that the air inside was warmer than the surrounding workings. His letter does not mention the discovery to his supervisors. He writes that he told no one at the mine. The letter is dated November 3rd, 1895. No subsequent letter from Aldridge mentions the passage. His brother's reply, if one was written, has not survived. In 1898, an account published in the Asheville Citizen-Times under the headline "Peculiarity of Local Mine Reported" described a miner in the Tow River area who claimed to have found a chamber exhibiting unusual light properties. The article is brief, 7 sentences, and treats the claim as a novelty. No names are given, no mine is identified. The article notes that the miner's supervisors had investigated and found nothing. It does not say what specifically was investigated or who conducted the inspection. 3 accounts, 2 states, a 9-year window. None connected during that period because the men involved did not know one another and had no reason to think their experiences were shared. The Carroll County miner told his brother and no one else. The Asheville account names nobody. Elias Cord told no one in his lifetime. The Crabtree Creek mine workings were abandoned entirely by 1915, when the Roan Mountain Copper Company dissolved. The shafts were not sealed. They were simply left. Over the following decades, the overburden shifted, water infiltrated the workings, and the lateral passages collapsed progressively inward. An engineering survey conducted by the North Carolina Division of Land Resources in 1978, assessing old mine hazards in Mitchell County, documented the Crabtree Creek site as presenting moderate subsidence risk. The survey team did not enter the western lateral because it was listed as fully collapsed. The survey notation reads, "Western passage, blocked at 50 feet from junction. Interior, not accessible." The survey team's report does not record any attempt to assess what lay beyond the blockage. The cedar chest containing Elias Cord's journal is now in the Western Carolina University Special Collections. The digitized images of the journal are available. The Graybeal transcription is available. The USG's field notes are available in Reston. The Crabtree Creek operational log, including the gap where 7 days of entries were removed, is available in Raleigh. The Carroll County letter is available in Hillsville, Virginia. These are not hidden documents, they are simply documents that have never been assembled in the same place and read as parts of the same record. What the record shows, assembled from its separate locations, is this. In the summer of 1889, a contract miner in Mitchell County found a natural chamber in the western lateral of an active copper mine that exhibited luminescence from the rock itself, had a floor marked by parallel lines he described as cut by a tool, and that he visited repeatedly over 11 days before the access point partially collapsed. He told no one. His journal was sealed. The mine log for that period had 7 days of entries removed. The USGS geologist who surveyed the site 2 years later was turned back from the western lateral. The mine was abandoned. The passage collapsed. The western lateral has not been accessible for more than a century. The parallel lines are what stay with you when you set the diary down. The luminescence has a geological explanation that is imperfect but available. The warm air has an explanation. But the lines, straight, parallel, cut into stone at 600 feet below the surface of the Blue Ridge in 1889, have no geological explanation that the current literature offers. Cord was not describing crystals or fault patterns or differential erosion. He was describing geometry. He was a man who spent his working life underground, who knew what natural rock looked like, who wrote about the seam quality and the condition of the hoist rope with flat precision. When he wrote that the lines were not natural, he was not speculating. He was recording what 12 years underground had taught him to see. The chamber, if it still exists in any form beneath the collapsed workings of the Crabtree Creek operation, has not been entered since July the 26th, 1889. Ground-penetrating radar routinely deployed in mining hazard assessments can locate subsurface voids at the depths the western lateral occupied. The technology exists. The site is documented. The 1978 survey established the coordinates. No one has applied for a survey permit. No institution has proposed an investigation. The Mitchell County records that could establish the precise location of the western lateral have not been cross-referenced against the USG's field notes. The work has not been done because no one has decided it is worth doing. Somewhere beneath a hillside in Mitchell County, behind a blockage that was already in place when a USGS geologist turned back in 1891, there may be a chamber with a floor that still holds, pressed into stone, the parallel lines that a miner named Elias Cord described in a Calfskin journal in the summer of 1889. The lines, he said, were not natural. The lines, he said, were cut like channels made by a tool. The lines he kept returning to, 4 times across 11 days, the way a person returns to something they cannot stop thinking about, the way a person returns to something they know they do not yet understand. The journal ends on July the 26th. The lines do not. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.